Hi everyone, Samip here from AECC in Global Melbourne. I would like to invite you all and thank you for joining the migration webinar Pathway to PR through Vocational Studies. As said, my name is Samip. I'm one of the education counselor here at AECC Global, and I will be hosting the event today. So, as the topic suggests, vocational studies. So, what is vocational studies? See, vocational education and training qualification has been designed and developed with the specific goal for preparing students with skills for work and students with skills, and also for those students who wants to join or rejoin the workforce, move into a new career, or gain additional skills and knowledge in the existing career that they already have. And no doubt, and one of the it's arguably said that vocational education is one of the best study options for international students because of various reasons, maybe affordability and cost, something to do with the excellent industrial experience one can get, or training, on hand training. And it also, most of the courses on this sector also guarantees work placement, which is quite beneficial for international students to get that feeling of how system work here in Australia. And it also acts as a bridge, in between vocational to higher education studies. So vocational is one of the most preferred study pathway for international students. So to further discuss on this, I'm joined by our migration agent Varni. Welcome, Varni.
Hi there, Samip. Thank you for having me on your platform today. You're right in saying that students studying vet courses do get industry experience. Now, we've also seen in the recent times that there's been an increase in inquiries from students asking about short courses, or I should say vet courses, and the likelihood of those courses leading to permanent residency. So we're hoping that today's presentation will be useful to those students that currently have questions in regards to should they pursue a course in vet sector, and if that study definitely will lead to PR pathways. So yeah, we're hoping today's seminar will be useful to our attendees.
Okay, cool. So I would just like to run through the topic that we are going to cover today. So we would be talking about migration pathway for students studying vet courses, migration pathway for students studying non-trade courses, some of the occupations in demand with vet courses relation. We'll be talking about the requirement for subclass 485. We'll talk about the skill assessment, how to do that. And we'll also talk about a very hot topic. This is about a benefit of studying in regional area in Australia.
Correct, yeah.
So Varni, with this regards,
yeah.
The first question that comes to my mind is about, so what are the main migration pathway for students studying vocational courses?
That actually is a really good question, because this is something that is on the minds of all our students, so anyone that's currently looking to maybe study a vet course. So it is a really valuable question to respond to. Now, there are several pathways available for vocational courses, although the process would be different to one of a professional occupation. However, there are permanent residency pathways available to students studying vet courses. So if a student studying a course that leads to an occupation that's on the medium long-term strategic occupation list, the student definitely will then have the options of considering subclass 189, 190, 491, 482, potentially 494, and also, potentially subclass 186 as well. Now, if the studies leads to an occupation that's on the short-term skilled occupation list, students then will have the chance to look at permanent residency through either subclass 190, which is a state-sponsored visa. You've also got the option of subclass 482, which is an employer-sponsored visa. They also have the option of considering subclass 494 and 491. These are regional visa options, but they can and will lead to permanent residency for students, studying vet courses. Now, so look, we'll talk about the different visa or migration pathways available to students. So I'll start off by giving some information on the employer-sponsored visa category. Now, so in the event a student has the relevant qualification, plus they have 2 years industry experience, they can, and they've got an employer that's willing to sponsor them, they can potentially look at subclass 482. Now, after working for 3 years on the TSS visa, employer can sponsor that applicant to a permanent resident on a permanent resident visa, which is the employer nomination scheme visa, which is subclass 186. Alternatively, the students, if they've got 3 years of experience in their nominated occupation and they've got relevant skills assessment, they can also look into direct stream of the 186 subclass. Now, apart from this, there is another visa subclass called skilled employer-sponsored regional provisional visa, which is a subclass 494. Now, this visa, obviously, you'll need to, it's a regional option, so the employer will need to be in a regional area, plus students will need to have 3 years of experience and also, of course, a skills assessment. Now, once the students meet the conditions of subclass 494, they then will have the option of considering subclass 191, which is a permanent resident visa. So usually for students, given the time frame for them to remain in the country to gain potential full-time work experience after finishing their studies is quite limited. It will be challenging for them to be sponsored on an employer-sponsored visa. However, that option is there for them. Now, the next pathway would be this general skill migration pathway. This is the pathway most international students consider, given it is tailored for international students. So the general skill migration visa pathways is a point-tested visa. So it's based on the department allocating points to students based on several factors. However, the minimum requirements for you to be eligible for this visa is you need to gain 65 points. You need to be under the age of 45. You also need to ensure that you have a valid English test with 6 in each band in IELTS, so equivalent test, other tests such as PTE, OET, etc. You also need to make sure that you hold a valid skills assessment in the relevant occupation. So once you meet these basic requirements, you then will be able to consider lodging your expression of interest for skilled independent visa, which is the subclass 189. This is a permanent resident visa. The students also then will have the option of considering skilled nominated visa, which is subclass 190. This is state sponsored. Under this visa, state also awards 5 points to students. So that's on top of the basic points claimed by students based on their merits. And under skilled work, regional visa, subclass 491, state or family options there. So under the state-sponsored visa category, state awards 15 points to students in the event they meet the state requirements. Under the family-sponsored stream, of course, if the applicant has a relative or an immediate family member that's an Australian citizen or permanent resident, they can, and they meet the sponsorship requirements, they can potentially consider the 491. Now, let's look at the migration pathways for students that may have finished their studies and they're currently on a 485 visa, and they may also be doing non-trade courses. So when I say non-trade courses, it's courses such as Diploma of Nursing or Diploma of Community Services. Now, most students are actually in this cohort. So what that means is, they may have finished first higher level studies and the qualification they gained wasn't leading to a potential permanent residency in Australia. So they then choose to study a non-trade course such as Diploma of Nursing or Diploma of Community Services, and hoping to, potentially look at PR through that avenue. Now, for those students, what they need to do is to ensure they, obviously meet the relevant qualifications or study the relevant qualification here. And this can be done whilst they're on a 485, depending on where they're at on their 485. So if they've just applied for it, depending on their own circumstances. So, you need to look be mindful of the duration of the course. Will they be able to meet that course before their 485 ends? Are they able to then get their skills assessment done before their 485 expires? Are they able to lodge their expression of interest before they, run out of their 485? So they need to be mindful of these factors, and also maybe potentially look at state requirements as well as to whether there's employment requirements to lodge 491 or even 190 if they meet the requirements. So look, students need to be mindful before choose to study these courses of those factors. And in the event it is identified that it is likely to be successful outcome, then yeah, students are looking into these avenues. Now, of course, once they finish their studies, they need to get their skills assessment from the relevant assessing authority. They also need to make sure they get that minimum 65 points. And of course, once they reach that 65 points, but it's always best to have higher points, they then, depending on the state they're residing in, may be able to lodge their expression of interest, whether it's 189, 190 or 491. So look, that avenue is also available for students that are currently studying non-trade courses.
Okay, so our initial discussion was about those students studying trade courses, and the second was about students studying non-trade related courses. Right?
Correct, yeah.
So with that regards, if we have to inform about some of the occupations which are quite in demand for the vet courses, what are those? Like popular vet courses?
Yeah. Okay, so look, there are quite a few occupations that are in demand currently. Now, I'll name a few. So as you can see, under the trade occupations, we have chefs and cook. We also have mechanics, and we've got carpenters, and we've also got welders. Under the non-trade occupations, we've seen a merge in civil engineering draftsperson, telecommunication technical officer, or telecommunication network engineer. And there are enrolled nurses in the non-trade occupations, and also community workers as well. These are to just name a few. There are other occupations as well. So, if students are wanting to discuss their courses or relevant occupation they may be keen on, they definitely can look into it. All right, so look, in order for you to become a carpenter in Australia, you need to study a Certificate 3 in carpentry. The standard duration of this is 2 years qualification. You also will need to, after you finish your studies, will need to gain 1 year post-qualification work experience, okay? Now, usually students who do these courses on a student visa, or potentially whilst, after they finish their studies and they want to look at alternate pathways and they've decided to become a carpenter, they can still choose to study this after they've applied for, or even before they've applied for 485, as long as they understand that they'll be able to complete their studies and obtain that 1 year post-qualification. So look, given the duration of the course, it may be a little hard for this particular occupation. However, the pathway is that once they finish the relevant studies and plus 1 year post-qualification, they then will be able to get their skills assessment with TRA under the Job Ready program, okay? Now, for offshore, or I should say overseas trained carpenters, in order for them to get their skills assessment here in Australia, they need 3 years full-time post-qualification employment experience.
That was for the offshore.
Correct, yes, that's right. Now, for chefs, chefs are in quite demand in Australia, and they're expected to actually grow in the next 5 years as well, the demand for them. In order for you to become a qualified chef in Australia, you need to meet the minimum requirement of Certificate 4 in commercial cookery. And as part of this course, students usually are expected to undertake a placement of 360 hours. So now once they've completed their studies, they then can begin their Job Ready program with TRA. Now this, so the first stage of the Job Ready program is to apply for the provisional skills assessment, and the 360 hours placement is a mandatory requirement for them to apply for provisional skill assessment. So that's the stage 1 of the Job Ready program. However, after they've been granted the provisional skill assessment, whilst they stay on their 485, they're expected to complete 1 year of full-time work full-time paid employment in order to, pass stage 2 and stage 3, and then, they assess to see if their workplace or employment in Australia meets the Australian industry skill level, and then they're assessed, and if they are assessed as someone having worked in an Australian standard environment and meet the relevant skills, they then obtain their skills assessment with TRA, and then they could use that skills assessment to consider those visa options we discussed earlier, so the subclass 190, 491, and potentially 189 if they've got high scores. For overseas trained chefs, the process would be the same, so they need 3 years full-time post-qualification employment experience.
And I think also on top of that, because of the recent happenings, if we look into the news, the trade industry, the hospitality industry is quite in demand. So I think this would be a good option for most of our students as well.
Correct, that's right. So you'll actually see, if you go into the different states migration program, that you'll see some of the states actually focus and have explicitly state that they are in demand of trade, anyone with trade qualifications, particularly Tasmania. If you look at Tasmania's requirement, they've actually said they are, they'll be prioritising anyone with trade occupations. So, if someone is really keen on pursuing a course or study in vocational level and wants to look at trade occupations, it is something that they can look into for certain. Now, just moving on, Samip, the next occupation we'll look at is motor mechanic. So to become a qualified motor mechanic in Australia, they need to study a Certificate 3. Now, usually, if the student decides to study Certificate 3 on its own, they will not be eligible for their 485, which is a temporary graduate visa, right? So for that reason, they actually will need to ensure they enroll themselves into a packaged course. So it could be because they need to ensure that they are registered in a course for at least 92 weeks, and then they study that course in Australia, physically in Australia, over 16 calendar months. So in order to do that, they may need to package, either Certificate 3, well, they need to definitely package Certificate 3, but they may also need to look into Certificate 4 and Diploma to ensure they meet that study requirement. So in the event they do meet that study requirement, they successfully finish their course, they can then, apply for their 485 and then gain that 1 year post-qualification and then obtain their skills assessment via the Job Ready program with TRA. Okay, so we then talk about overseas qualified mechanics and the requirements from TRA for migration skills assessment is that they need to have AQF Certificate 3 and they need 3 years full-time paid employment in the nominated occupation, so as a motor mechanic at the required skill level. They also need to make sure that at least 12 months of paid employment in the nominated occupation in the 3 years immediately before applying for TRA. Okay, so that's a crucial information for anyone that's qualified from overseas. All right, so we'll quickly have a look at other vet courses leading to PR. Now, like I said to you earlier, we've seen, students wanting to undertake these courses. One, because, it is closely related to the engineering profession. Two, it is on an associate level and therefore is achievable by students within a shorter time frame. Okay, so occupations that are currently on the medium long-term strategic occupation list. And also you'll see that civil engineering draft person and also electrical engineering draft persons are currently on the New South Wales 190 and 491 occupation list. It also continues to be on other states under their graduate stream pathway as well. So that's indicating there is a demand for these occupations in the regional parts of Australia. Now, the requirements or qualifications required to obtain this to potentially look into getting your skills assessed into these occupations is that you need to have advanced diploma level of studies. Now, Advanced diploma, the standard duration can be anywhere from 1.5 years to 2 years, but some providers are willing to fast track that for 485 applicants, visa holders, and they may be able to finish that over 12 months or anywhere between 1 year to 1.5 year. So if that's the case, they can then potentially get their skills assessed with the relevant assessing body, and also potentially look at PR pathways via these avenues as well. So these options are definitely there for students wanting to consider other vet courses in the event, they're a fresh student wanting to start or look into a course that's leading to PR, or, they've successfully finished a course and it's not leading to PR, they want to consider something else in the engineering field. They could definitely consider these as options.
So with that regards, Varni, student who wants to apply for a 485 visa, let's say, just right after completing diploma and certificate, would that be possible? And if possible, then how long is the duration for that 485?
Yeah, well, this is actually another good question, because we see clients come to us and saying, look, I've just finished certificate 3, and can I apply for 485? Or I've just finished my diploma of nursing, can I then apply for 485? So it is a valid question, and students will need to pay attention to the duration and also the occupation that may be leading from their studies. So look, in order for a student to be eligible for a temporary graduate visa, which is that subclass 485, the initial criteria is they need to, first of all, meet the Australian study requirement. We went through it earlier, but they need to make sure that the course is registered for 92 weeks and the course was undertaken physically in Australia over 16 months. Okay, so if they then meet that criteria, then yes, they may one step closer to applying for 485. Now, another factor they need to be mindful of is the studies that they've undertaken in Australia and the occupation resulting as that study will need to be on the medium long-term strategic occupation list. So for example, just going back to that enrolled nurse example, that's not on the medium long-term occupation list, right? So for that reason, anyone that has done diploma of nursing will not qualify for the 485. So they need to check that the occupation is listed on the medium long-term list, okay? We also talked about how the study needs to be packaged. So usually a certificate 3, certificate 4, leading to diploma will usually meet the study requirements. So if you're currently enrolled in just, let's say, a certificate 3 or 4, or enrolled in diploma of nursing or community services, you might want to chat to us to get a better idea about whether it leads to your subclass 485. Now, students, as part of students that may be studying a trade course usually have to, as part of the course, undertake 360 hours of placement, or in some events, students are lucky enough to have paid work. Now, they need to demonstrate they've actually obtained the relevant placement or 360 hours of paid work in order to apply for provisional skill assessment. Now, this provisional skill assessment is a mandatory requirement to apply for a valid subclass 485. Failure to do so will result in negative refusal. So for that reason, students need to ensure whilst they're studying that they keep track on, and they keep track of their hours, their logbooks, any other supporting documents required, so they know that when they finish their studies, they will not encounter any issues in applying for their provisional skill assessment. Now, once they've applied for their provisional skills assessment, of course, they can wait for their outcome, but if the event their student visa is running out, they can apply for their subclass 485 with the payment receipt or evidence of applying for provisional skill assessment. But of course, the outcome needs to be positive. So that's, a crucial information that they need to be mindful of. So like I said, some students, if their occupation's on the medium long-term strategic occupation list and they meet the study requirements, will be able to apply for 485. And the duration on this 485, they actually will be applying for something called the graduate work stream pathway under the 485 visa subclass. And the standard duration of this visa is 18 months.
Okay. So with this regard, we discussed about skill assessment, right? So My understanding is trade courses as well as non-trade courses both has to go through this. So what are the process involved in this? Or, like right after the
Yeah.
completion of vocational courses, how do one go ahead with skill assessment process?
Yeah, okay. So look, depending on what they're studying in Australia, they will need to go through and apply for their skills assessment. Now, if students are studying a trade course, such as a chef or a cook or a mechanic or carpenter, welder, any one of those courses, they will go through something called Job Ready program with Trades Recognition Australia. So the criteria to apply for this skills assessment is they need to hold Australian qualification, relevant qualifications. The standard minimum qualification is either Certificate 3 or Certificate 4, depending on the occupation. They also need to make sure they've got that adequate 360 hours of placement or paid employment experience to apply for this provisional skill assessment. And also, once they have been issued or granted the provisional skill assessment, they also then need to make sure that they comply with the expectation of Trades Recognition Australia and ensure they work for 1 year full-time paid work. It can be under supervision whilst they're on their 485 to get successful outcome in their nominated occupation for migration purposes. So that's for any students that are currently actually on a student visa and undertaking vet courses. We now can look at, we'll look into overseas skills assessment programs. So look, it's not really relevant for international students currently studying here, but it is for anyone from any one of those countries mentioned in the screen here. They don't necessarily need to have an Australian qualification, but they do in fact will need extensive employment experience on a full-time basis as well, okay? They also need to have worked at least for 12 months on a full-time basis in their nominated occupation in the 3 years prior to lodging their application with TRA. So that's the Overseas Skills Assessment Program. So that's for anyone from, Bangladesh, Brazil, China, Fiji, etc. You can see the list there. So that's the pathway for any trade persons with trade qualification from those countries. All right, so this information here is for anyone that actually don't fall within those countries in our last slide. So anyone from other countries, they will, or for example, let's say someone was on a student visa here, they did a Bachelor's of Accounting, and then they want to start studying Certificate 4 to become a chef. This is the pathway they will look into. So the Migration Skills Assessment. So the relevant qualification can be from overseas, so it can be from Australia, but they need 3 years full-time or equal and part-time employment undertaken after qualification was issued. So that's crucial there. And of course, for students, it is difficult if they're wanting to become a chef under this pathway, but it is something that they can look into, depending on their circumstances, of course. If they've got previous qualifications, it may be a feasible pathway. Employment experience, I should have said. That's the skills assessment requirements for trade courses, Samip. I will go into the assessing body called Vet Assess. Now, they also conduct skills assessment for general occupations. So civil engineering draft person will fall under general occupation. Now, Vet Assess is one of the assessing bodies that can, assess your skills to see if you have the relevant skills. So for full migration purposes, you need relevant qualifications. So you'll need to ensure you have, whether it's Certificate 4 or Advanced Diploma, plus 1 year employment is required. So that's a mandatory requirement with this assessing body. And most students really find it challenging to find work in their relevant nominated occupation, but they need to be mindful of that requirement and make sure that they try their best to find employment in their nominated occupation. In the event, Vet Assess is the only assessing body that will issue a skills assessment for migration purposes. So if they don't meet the criteria of employment requirements, they then will not be able to get a positive skill assessment, and that will mean that they will potentially not have a PR pathway available to them. Okay. Now, employment must be, it can be at least 20 hours per week. So that's saying that they can still work on a student visa and have that included towards their employment requirements for the purpose of their skills assessment. All right, so we'll also look at Engineers Australia. So we spoke about civil engineering draft person, and we also looked at electrical engineering draft person. Now, if a student studies an accredited course and meets the qualification requirements, so usually it's an advanced diploma or diploma leading to advanced diploma, they can then just get their skills assessed with Engineers Australia with English requirements. Okay, they don't actually need post-qualification employment experience. However, if the course is non-accredited, they can still get their skills assessed by Engineers Australia. However, they will need to apply through the CDR, which is Competency Demonstration Report Pathway, in which they then will need to talk about 3 career episodes. So that's basically saying they'll need to demonstrate they have the skills and knowledge to work as a civil engineering draft person, or depending on the occupation, they'll be looking to get their skills assessed. Demonstrate they've got the relevant experience. Okay, so that's the pathways for skill assessment requirements via Engineers Australia. Now, the next one looks at nursing occupation. So anyone that's currently studying diploma of nursing, they will be able to get their skills assessed by ANMAC. The requirement there, of course, is they need to have their course, and usually the course is accredited. So as part of that course, they will have undertaken placement, and they then can, with the relevant English scores, be able to get their skills assessed as an enrolled nurse. Now, enrolled nurse is on the short-term skilled occupation list. So the visa options for them is subclass 190, 482, 494 and 491. It is in demand in some of the states, so Tasmania. Adelaide has it on their list, I believe. I know that Western Australia doesn't, but yeah, look, it is an occupation that's in demand, and there is always a permanent residency pathway under the graduate stream of that state. That's it.
Right. Yeah, now the hot topic for everyone, regional.
Yeah.
Everyone is talking about regional. I want to go to regional, yeah. But I would like to understand from your point of view, why is this regional movement, like it's a craze going on, yeah? Could you just give us a brief idea about it?
Sure. Look, it is a good question, because we've seen in 2019, the Department of Home Affairs introduced the shift to regional parts of Australia by introducing subclass 491, which is the state-sponsored regional visa. They also, as an incentive, stated the states will be awarding students 15 points in the event they meet the state requirements. So that acts as an incentive for students to relocate to regional parts of Australia and consider whether it's the graduate pathway or whether it's living and working stream of that regional Australia to look at their PR pathways. The purpose of the Australian government, introducing this regional migration pathways, because it's trying to promote and get more people to move to regional areas, and also to help build skills and also meet the shortage of any occupations or skills in those relevant areas. Another benefit would be, in the event a student studies in the regional parts of Australia, they then will also be able to claim additional 5 points towards their skill migration points. System. So look, and also another thing I'll just quickly touch on is the fact that some, depending on which state they're in, they may also be able to access DARMA as well, DARMA occupation list. However, under the DARMA, they will need employer sponsorship as well. So not everyone may be able to consider that, but if someone's got an employer and they meet the employment requirement, they may be able to have access to that. Another benefit would be, living in regional areas would be just far more better than living in cities due to living cost and, of course, the lifestyles. For that reason, there are a trend in students considering regional studies and living and working in regional areas in the future. So, and also the department actually, in fact, prioritises visa applications for 491 and subclass 494 as well. So that's another incentive as to why students should really look into potential benefits in studying regional parts of Australia.
So now, so regional, yeah. So I think this craze will continue even for the regional to further go, and a student opting to look for a regional option is always a good option at looking at how things are going right now.
Yeah.
Yep. So yeah. Um, so now we would be taking question and answer, I believe, Barney.
Let me just have a quick look to see if there are questions, because I don't actually have access to it on my PC. What's the time now? Yep. So look, we're almost at the end of our allocated time for this presentation. So I think we might wrap it up, Samip. And then, of course, see you again in another live webinar.
Yeah, sure, not a problem. See, if we missed out, so we did not take any question and answer. But if you have any such, then please reach out to us directly. We have our offices in Sydney, Brisbane, and Melbourne. You can get in touch with us over the phone. You can book an appointment. Feel free to do that. And also, as we are at the end of the webinar, our migration webinar, I would like to thank everyone for attending this migration webinar. Our second session will be Job Ready with TIFF starting at 2 p.m. and we'll cover experts' insight on the benefits of studying at TIFF NSW, Queensland, WA, SA, and Victoria. So guys, stay tuned and be connected with us. There would be good information coming your way. Have a great day.
Thank you.